Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Dave Cohen. I'm a director here at Level Up Consulting Partners. I really appreciate people making a little bit of time for us today. And we are going to continue on with our Insight series of live conversations here. And I'm very pleased to be joined by my colleague, Will Scatling, who's a director here at Level Up as well. Welcome, Wills.
Thank you, Dave. Nice to be here.
Yes, and it's a particular pleasure to have with us Hilary Wandal, who is currently the Chief Privacy and Compliance Officer at Dun & Bradstreet. And previous to that did a lot of work at TrustArc, and before that was a compliance officer at Merck as well. And we go way back. We've had a lot of good time and sessions together in the privacy profession. And I should also mention, because we were just chatting before we became live here, that Hilary served as president of the board of directors at the IAPP. And many of us are excited to be going down to DC for the summit conference, which will be kicking off next week. So very happy to be there. So welcome, Hilary.
Thank you so much, Dave and Wills. It's great to be with you. And yes, absolutely. Looking forward to lots of great things happening in DC next week too.
Yeah. So as if you've tuned in before to this series, we try to keep this just kind of an organic conversation. As you read, we've got a program description and a place that we want to start, but we're very open to hearing from you out in the audience. If you have questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat. I'll be monitoring that as we go along, and we'll try to address the questions that we get. So please feel free to pop in there. And we're also recording this, so perhaps you're even seeing this as a recording if you weren't able to join us live. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. And what we wanted to talk about today was if you happen to be working in an organization, let's say in a privacy capacity, a privacy program capacity, and the current kind of overriding philosophy within your organization is kind of compliance is something that needs to be done for legal reasons, kind of to stay out of the radar of regulators and just kind of a necessary burden. That is one way to go about business. But if you are operating in an organization like that or have operated in an organization like that, you probably know that it's a lot harder to get your job done than if you are operating in an organization where there's an actual ethic about doing the right thing and coming at compliance from well, this is what we should do, this is the right thing to do type of attitude and philosophy. And many of you also know that it's quite important for that philosophy to be from as high up in the organization as possible, coming down to everybody else working in the organization. So with that kind of opening, Hilary, do you agree? And kind of what's been your experience as you've gone through your professional journey in the privacy space with regards to this?
I couldn't agree more. So thanks for starting there. I think it's been interesting to reflect back. I started doing privacy related work a really, really, really long time ago. So more than 25 years ago, I'll just put that in perspective. And I was so fortunate that early on in my tenure, working as a privacy professional, I worked for a leader who was very values oriented. And I supported him in starting the very first global privacy program at Merck, the big pharmaceutical company most of you probably heard of. And we developed a program that was more principles oriented from the outset. And his vision, which I have tried to carry forward in most of my career subsequently, was around a principles-based approach that was flexible and could adapt with changes in the law over time, but that was geared towards what we historically have called the FIPS. Certainly those have evolved significantly since that point in time, but that really was at the heart of how I learned how to do privacy. And I felt so blessed to have been trained that way, because since my career has gone on, I have been, as so many of us have been, confronted by all of the additional laws and regulations that have been adopted. So to put it in perspective, I actually started doing global privacy work in 2001. And at the time, we were very focused on a few key laws in the US, HIPAA, COPPA. Essentially, that was all that we were really focused in on at that time. But then we also were looking at the EU Data Protection Directive of 1995, which wasn't all that, it was kind of new still at that point.
Right.
And we were looking at how do we deal with the fact that there's this restriction on cross-border data flow. Long before Schrems had brought any cases before the CJEU, we were thinking about that. So long story short, things have changed dramatically, as we all know, with laws and regulations all over the world in 100 plus countries. I think we're up to 150, 60 at this point in time. And even in the US with 16 different states that have privacy laws, if you don't take a values, principle-oriented approach, it's just so overly complicated.
Yeah, well, and Hillary, let me, Wills, I want to get to you in just a minute here, but you bring up a really good point. Principles-based approaches, an additional benefit there is that, as you mentioned, the laws change, they get updated, and technology, of course, races ahead of the laws. So if you structure your compliance program in a principles-based way, hopefully you're providing enough resiliency and flexibility to adapt to new laws while also complying to existing laws, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things that's very important for those of us who operate in this space and those who may be listening in and trying to understand how to operate effectively in this space, it's very different from other areas of the law for the most part, in that one, it's being driven by changes in data, changes in technology, Dave, as you pointed out already, and changes in societal expectations and concerns as a result of that. And so what it means in part is that you are thinking about how to address lots of different requirements that have to tie into the way data works. And we all know the data is moving everywhere all the time, and the technology underpinning it, people are innovating all the time. And so if you take a strict legalistic approach to trying to manage that, it becomes virtually impossible to do it well as those things are all changing around you. So starting with the principles and making sure that those are embedded into how the organization you are part of and trying to lead around privacy, how it operates, makes it a lot easier to evolve and adapt as things change around you.
Right. And then, the other thing about that, the principles-based approach as opposed to a very law-specific or technology-specific approach is you can also use it to motivate and kind of get other teams to understand the reasoning behind these compliance efforts. I know one of the things that I really enjoy about our current work, and Wills and I both know this from actual work with clients, is when we are working as our point of contact with the project sponsor who's in the privacy program, that person is typically very well versed and understands the reasoning behind complying with all these laws. But as we, for instance, in a data mapping exercise, interview different teams, different functional teams, the sales team, the marketing team, et cetera, sometimes if a mistake is made and we go in and just start asking a lot of questions to try to get to whether we're in compliance or not, people kind of get lost and they misunderstand. And if we take a step back and explain why it is that we are trying to comply with these laws, you see light bulbs go off, you see aha moments. And then when those people have become educated about the reasoning behind these necessary compliance actions, there's a lot more buy-in and that you just are more effective at getting things taken care of.
Absolutely, Dave. And I'll just say one more point there, if I could add on to what you just said. I love when people start owning it, the business people, whether they're the data scientists or the technology team or the product owners or the process owners. They start owning the requirements themselves and they are thinking ahead of you and they've already come, I thought about this, like, what am I missing? That to me is one of the most rewarding things. And you're building that maturity, that competency within the business. So privacy isn't just something you tell other people how to do. It's something they own for themselves and it's part of how they do their own jobs.
Yeah. And there, we just got somebody posted a great question in the comments section. How does one assess tone at the top? So I know we kind of alluded to that at the beginning of the program. And if you're fortunate enough to work for a company that has leadership that really wants to establish and convey a particular attitude, philosophy. Let's say it's a company that's heavily B2C and has a big customer base, and it's very important to maintain that communication, that trust, that connection with the customers and consumers. But what are your responses to this, Hillary? Because I know you have had been able to see a breadth of different companies and experience different companies and different corporate philosophies. What about that tone from the top?
Yeah, it's a really terrific question, firstly. So thank you to the person that asked it. How does one assess tone at the top is a very delicate, I think, area for one who's in a compliance, privacy, and ethics, a responsible AI role, and I'll say cybersecurity too, because I think there's a lot of commonalities across. And assessing tone at the top, in my experience, starts with understanding the culture and really listening to what do the leaders emphasize, what matters to them, what do you hear directly in the communications you're having with them if you have the opportunity to meet one-on-one or in smaller group meetings. What do the people who work with them every day emphasize? So what do they care about most? And then once you've understood, and or at least you think you understand what they care about most, having an opportunity then to meet with them and introduce how what you're doing around privacy, around compliance, ethics, responsible AI, cybersecurity supports that mission. And you start to build a bridge between what they have already been talking about matters to them and what you can offer, and how what you do supports what they say is most important. And sometimes I know many of us have been in situations where the leadership already gets it. They actually are proponents. They're out there like, how are you helping me meet these goals that I have to put our clients first, to make sure we're building a global network of trust? That's what our company focuses on, building a global network of trust in the data that we provide. And so it's part and parcel to making sure that we're delivering on our mission, that we do compliance, ethics, and privacy effectively.
Yeah, absolutely. Wills, I know we've been talking here within Level Up Consulting Partners about the ever-present conversations around upcoming AI governance, and we were kind of prepping for this session and discussing about how companies seem to be taking a lot of different stances with regards to that. Are privacy professionals going to be kind of adopting this AI compliance responsibility set, or is it being sectioned off? And just kind of curious about your thoughts about this, all of the buzz recently about AI governance that seems to be ever present these days.
Can I be a politician here and just sit on the fence for this one and say it depends? And I can see Hillary nodding. So I mean, like Hillary said, different companies have different cultures, different structures, different bodies, different expertise, different usage of AI. I think we're certainly seeing, there's an argument, and you and I heard it in Brussels at the IAPP conference. There's definitely a strong argument for why privacy might be the owner of AI governance, but there's also a lot of arguments, I said I'm sitting on the fence, for why AI governance might not be sitting under privacy. And it's like, I've spoken to a lot of privacy professionals, and some of them have had it put upon them and told, basically, go away and you're responsible for developing AI governance within the organization. And I've heard others say that they're not sure that they want it, and they're not sure that it belongs to them, because it's AI is such a complicated and not that privacy isn't a multifaceted technology, isn't it? And I know I listened to Trevor talk about it. Trevor Hughes, for anybody who didn't know who I was talking about, talk about it at the IAPP Privacy Security Risk back last year. And he was saying how, privacy breaks that makes AI go a lot faster, and completely agree with his reasoning there. I think that, you can expand upon that and say, if AI is the car, privacy has to be in that car. Privacy has to be sitting in that car. Now, is privacy always driving that car? I don't know, because I think, if personal data is not part of the AI process, most privacy professionals are going to walk in the room, fill out, an initial, whether it's a privacy risk assessment, a PIA, a DPI. As soon as the first question is, does it include personal data? And the answer is no. The privacy professional, and great to hear Hillary's response to this, is probably going to say, this is my world. It's like, you're not processing personal information. there's no risk from my world.
It's out of scope here. Yeah, and I've got plenty of
I'll go and deal with. I've got 400 things over here I have to deal with. You guys work this one out. Which means, is privacy still going to drive those conversations? That's where I think, you're seeing companies form, whether it's steercos or committees to oversee it. I'm sure at some point there'll be a defined role that companies will start to define as to who heads up AI. But I'm sure if you spoke to our friends in technology, they'll be screaming, how can privacy own AI, when it's like they don't understand necessarily how the algorithms are built or structured or used or read, or it's like, how do they can't build AI models. It's like, we do all that. It's like, and the security people are going to be sitting there saying, well, without us, how do you know it's safe? How do you know it's secure? How do you know it's robust? It's like, again, I know privacy programs need that, and I know privacy professionals have had a lot of experience in, when GDPR came on board, building out massive global programs to comply with this new regulation. And I think change management, privacy professionals are, this is one of their skill sets from what they've had to deal with in the last 10 years. It'd be great to get Hilary's insight, but just to end my sitting on the fence, I think privacy sits in the car. I think there's a lot of other people sitting in the car with privacy, and I think it, depending on the use case, depends on who drives the car on any given day. Is that vague enough?
Or whether you end up having to change cars and actually get into a different kind of car, maybe a newer generation of a car as you go. Yeah. I guess Will, you said it so well. I think that those are all really important points as to how do we tackle this new integration of AI into the problem of data compliance, data ethics. And I'll reflect back for a moment on some of the early days. As I said, I've been working on privacy for a very long time. And I still remember when privacy was basically about those core principles I mentioned, and then data breach laws became effective. After that, there were no breach laws at the time when I started doing privacy, believe it or not. And then data security started becoming a big thing. And then for me, and where I was in my own tenure, we started looking at how other areas of compliance, ethics, and enterprise risk started to come together with privacy and data security. And we weren't really talking about cybersecurity at that point in time. And then fast forward a little bit more, a lot of people were talking about AI and machine learning and like, what does this mean? These black boxes, like black box in terms of how is working, and like, how do we actually manage transparency and data subject rights? I mean, those conversations were happening nearly 10 years ago already. Right?
Big data. Yeah.
Like a lot of people forget that, like generative AI is new, but the conversations around data ethics and analytics ethics and all of what that meant. I mean, there's been books written on it and conferences and symposia being held around this for quite some time. So when I joined the role that I did at Dun & Bradstreet nearly 3 years ago, one of the things that I was focused in on being part of a data analytics company is how do we approach alongside of the emerging cybersecurity being a bigger and bigger issue, but also emerging laws around AI, because we knew that was on the radar. When I joined, it was right before the EU AI Act had gotten introduced as from a legislative perspective. But we were looking at a lot of other things, automated decision-making under GDPR and some of the enforcement trends that were beginning to happen there. And so we thought about, how do we create a baseline for compliance and ethics around data and around technology that actually can, back to Dave, what we were saying at the outset, evolve with the data, evolve with the technology? Because the interesting thing, if we get into a very legalistic mindset for just a moment, people oftentimes take the position, well, it's not PII. Well, we all know that that's generally not a term in most laws. It is in a few, but it's generally personal data, and personal data is very broadly defined. And we know pseudonymized data is still personal data, to which the requirements still apply with some flexibility, right? And to truly be anonymized, can you be that anymore? So we started thinking about, how do you build a baseline program around data compliance and ethics that you can layer privacy into, that you can layer data security and cybersecurity into, that you can work together with an enterprise risk management program in anticipation of AI. So how do I think about it? I actually think that AI is a shared, it needs to, at least for now, be a shared governance approach if it's done effectively, because no one existing area can really own it. And even if you were to appoint a chief AI officer in a company, that person can't own this by themselves because they have dependencies on all of these other areas. So I think what we're going to see more and more of is that we're going to have people who have expertise in specific parts of the problem, but you will have leaders who actually have grown through the expertise in one area to look at things more broadly and help an organization be able to manage across these different areas in an effective way while maintaining an eye on what's happening in the external environment and how best do we adapt, whether it's new law, whether it's new technologies that's creating, we're going to, obviously technology is going to continue to change. With it. And I think you need a fundamental framework for broad and technology compliance and ethics, and you need it to be a shared governance approach across all those different groups that have areas of expertise, including, by the way, I didn't mention product safety and intellectual property.
Well, that's a perfect segue, Hillary, to what I was just thinking about, which is a risk-based approach, and to kind of ground this in practicality. With when a company is going to evaluate business processes that involve personal information or business processes that involve AI and AI decision making, we talk to client after client that wants to make sure that they're part of the conversation for establishing high risk processes first and elevating those, and then making sure that they have the right people around to decide whether it's worth the risk or not to do this business process with using this new technology, or benefits versus costs, benefits versus risks. Would you agree with that? That really, it seems to me, one of the really key things is getting people to make decisions, the right people to make those decisions about utilizing technology and for certain purposes within the organization, and prioritization being a key to that. Yeah.
Most definitely. We have to start with what is the value proposition? What are the benefits both to the company itself as well as to customers, clients, and other stakeholders? And then accordingly, what are the risks? I actually think for those of us who are privacy pros, the concept of a legitimate interest balancing test, if it's done right, actually extends very well into the space. How do you think about the benefits? How do you think about the risks? And how do you balance those two things against each other? And it can be quantitative, but it's really a qualitative exercise. But I would say just one more point on this that I think is very relevant for us is, and we talk about it a lot, risk is and a risk mindset, and how you think about risk in a way that can relate to other areas of risk so that people can frame it around the risks they care about most is really important. So embedding core enterprise risk management principles and methodologies into everything that's being done here, I think is going to become increasingly important for teams to bring these different stakeholders together with different views on risk. We always have fun conversations. Can we align to a core risk a standard, a core risk methodology? Because if we can't, how do you really assess it across everything, including financial risk, and what that really means for the organization?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. Yeah, go ahead, Will.
I was saying, it's funny you should say that, Hillary. We are starting to hear that from companies, that how do we align? We've got an enterprise risk, we've got a privacy risk, we've got a security. How do we align those risk characteristics and the terminology? Because one of the bigger challenges, I'm sure you've dealt with this, is at some point you do have to report up where the risks are. And the last thing the board wants to hear is 4 different versions of risk, and trying to understand how do they all interact with each other, as opposed to continuity, and this risk is this level and that level they can understand across all risks. So it's interesting, we're starting to hear companies talk about how do we align our risk characteristics throughout the organization, which is challenging, to be honest. It is challenging.
It is, but I would actually say from my own personal experience that starting with an enterprise risk policy where you define your categories of risk that matter to your organization, where you define your organization's risk tolerance, and you define what are your categories of impact. Like, how do you think about financial impact? Where's your threshold for moving
Mhm.
something from a moderate or a medium risk to a medium high or considerable risk to a high or really significant risk for the
Catastrophic.
organization. And if you define that, right? Like if
Yeah.
you define that across the different parameters that align to your
Yeah.
risk categories, then regardless of what new risk you're addressing, you can make sure that it fits in that mold. And to your point, Wills, when you speak to then the audit committee of the board or whatever part of the board, whether it's the whole board or otherwise that's looking at risk, you can speak in a common language that allows them to exercise that oversight and governance in an appropriate way that doesn't require them to get down into the nitty-gritty details.
Which they don't want to do or
They
don't have the
never
time to do. No.
Yeah, yeah. And when you mentioned, what I was going to say is when you mentioned legitimate interest, Hillary, it reminded me, and Wills, I think probably you and I were at a few of these sessions in Brussels last November at the IPP conference, where we heard again and again, the reason privacy professionals are being asked to take on some of the AI governance work is because some of these techniques lend themselves well, some of these tests lend themselves well to the AI test. And so the techniques, the processes have been developed. Can we effectively port these processes, these techniques over for this new governance challenge? Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think, like I said, privacy, if privacy is not involved in your AI governance, you've got a problem. And you're taking a massive risk. Privacy is not always going to, as we said, and as Hillary said, leaping from car to car and maybe into the occasional bus, depending on the size of the AI model that you're looking at and what it's being used for. But I mean, privacy has to be one of the key contributors and one of the members of whatever steering committee you have that's running your AI governance and your AI programs, and looking at the use cases as well.
And Wills, I just have to say to that point, jumping from car to car. So we all know that VIN numbers are pretty broadly available, and the VIN number is associated with an owner, and the owner actually has to do all kinds of documentation, registrations. But we all know all this paperwork we have to file for the purposes of having our insurance and our registrations. Anyway, it's tied to a person.
Yeah.
So oftentimes people will say, oh, it's just a car. It's not personal data. Well, if you can associate it back to an individual, and there's all kinds of records out there that are readily available that associate VIN numbers back to an individual, you do need to think about the fact that a vehicle itself is personal data.
Yeah.
It's not in all contexts, but these are things I think people oftentimes draw these big, bright lines, and it's huge amounts, like a very large spectrum of gray.
And as you say, Hillary, personal data now is not just what you're collecting, but you're creating it. So the world can, as you said, technology and the amount of personal data is just going to continue to race ahead. And if looping way back to the beginning of the conversation when Dave was bringing up, how do you build a privacy program and ethics, etc., and principles? Yeah, as you said, if you try and go from the regulatory field, you're chasing your tail, and technology everything is racing forward at such a pace that, from a privacy perspective, it's what is today is not tomorrow, and you've got to have a program that can enable you to look over the horizon, not just to the horizon.
Yeah, and Will's kind of building on that. Hillary, I love the vehicle and the VIN number kind of metaphor because it makes me think about how somebody needs to have ownership and be the point person and kind of drive the process and keep things rolling. But as we've talked about earlier, it's absolutely has to be a horizontal across the business. And just as privacy was never something that a person or even a department can accomplish without the intimate communication and cooperation with other important departments, it's going to be the same for all governance and all compliance efforts. And I love the concept that's been around for a number of years now of the privacy champion, and we might almost say the compliance or ethics champion within different departments. And that is those people that kind of get it, as it were, and understand the importance for good data stewardship, to have those individuals. And so for those of you that are listening in that are maybe trying to stand up initially or build a privacy program, one of the most important things you can do is seek out those individuals that will help you get the work done within all those key functional departments of your business, that process a lot of personal data, of course, marketing, legal, HR, etc. And if you can find those people, those privacy champions, they can help you get that work done and be those connections and those liaisons, so that you can build out those committees, those horizontal committees across the organization, because that's what you're going to need to be able to effectively get your compliance work done.
And Hillary, I know we only have a couple more minutes. Chances of a federal AI bill in the US? I've given up federal privacy law, so.
Yeah, in terms of the federal privacy law, I think we're all just completely giving up, because we're about to have 20-some state laws probably this year.
A third of the states I read today.
I mean, we tried to get a federal breach notification law that wasn't sector specific for how long, and we just ended up with every single state having them. I don't know. I mean, I think that there's just so much that has to be addressed at the federal level, and the states are acting, and I think it's less than 50%, honestly. I mean, I do think obviously we're going to see a lot coming out of the executive order around AI, and certainly that the agencies are expecting from organizations, private entities that they engage with. And I think that probably will drive more. But these legislating in this area at the federal level has been fraught with difficulty from the very early days that I have been involved. And I just think that we don't have the political will in this country to do it.
Yeah.
Sorry for being a downer, but
you're a bit more optimistic than me. You're up around 50. I'm somewhere around 25. I think, if I'm with you. I just was interested to hear what your thoughts were as to whether we're going to follow the state privacy law and have 50.
I thought we were going to get the ADPPA, right? I thought that one was happening.
No.
Here we are.
Yeah. And I would tend to agree. But I will say it's been somewhat heartening news that the executive order, a lot of agencies responded. There was some stories out in the news just a few months ago that a lot of the agencies have really stepped up and responded. And the United States government is a very large contractor with a lot of private entities that report up into it. So if they have to follow those guidelines, I wonder about a kind of de facto standard being established out there in the private sector. And if that just becomes the case, and that becomes the kind of operating rules, then in some ways that might operate as a de facto federal law.
I think what we saw with GDPR is very likely going to take place too. I mean, with the EU AI Act, it's very probable that that's going to have worldwide impact the same way GDPR did. And that, coupled with where I would say automated decision-making regulation and being introduced in California, obviously existing in some of the other state laws today, and how that is being seen under GDPR. I think these things will all come together where you'll have some baseline expectations, which, Dave, I think takes us back to the start of the conversation. Whether the law is federal in our country, or being influenced by laws from other countries and just sitting at the state level, there will be a de facto set of common principles that customers expect of their vendors and suppliers, and partners expect of each other, that ultimately over time will probably define what we all find ourselves needing to do every day. There probably will be certifications that are coming out that people feel that they need to adhere to get business. And even without federal legislation, we're all going to end up in a place that's probably influenced by a combination of those factors.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. And so with that, I want to be respectful of people's time. We're just a little bit past the 30-minute mark here. Hillary, thank you so much for spending some time with us today. Always such a great time to have a conversation with you. Hopefully we can connect in Washington, D.C. at the IAPP Global Privacy Summit sometime next week. And Wills, as always, appreciate you helping out with the program here today. So
you're welcome.
And to you all in the audience, thank you for joining us today. I hope you I hope you found the conversation stimulating and got a few tidbits that you can carry back to your office. So with that, I'll take us to a program close. Thanks, everybody, and have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Nice to see you, Hilary.
Nice to see you.
Bye, everybody.